Well, good morning. Good to be with you this morning. I actually had one of those work dreams last night. You ever heard of those work dreams? You know, the anxiety dreams. I had a dream that I missed the worship service. Actually, the 8 o'clock this morning. So I'm really glad I'm here this morning. I made it. You know, I woke up obviously instantly, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning. I was like, but so I'm here. It's good to be here on this beautiful day. We're talking about this series about big faith. What are the 5 things God uses to grow big faith in our lives? That bulletproof confidence, trust, and faith in God no matter what happens in our lives. And one of the things we're talking about today is practical teaching as a way that one of the things that God uses to grow our faith. Now this week I've been in Southern California. Maybe that's why I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was in Southern California. I've been doing some work with Fuller Seminary in Southern California, and Mark Laberton is the president of Fuller, and he tells a story of when he was a pastor in a Presbyterian church in California. And he was preaching one day, and he was looking out over the congregation as he was preaching. And by the way, I see a lot. When a preacher's in front, you think that you only see a little bit, but I actually see it all. I see the elbows go into people's ribs. I see the people falling asleep. I see everything. I see the yellow jacket this gentleman's wearing over here, Dick Subach's jacket. Stand up, Dave. And I think it's great he's wearing his grandfather's jacket today. So he did that in honor of his grandfather, Dick Subach, who, if you don't know him, was a great saint and pillar of our church who passed away. And we'll be celebrating his life along with many others on November. It's All Saints Day coming up. But so all I'm saying is I see what's happening. And so he was up there preaching, and he could look out over the congregation, and he could see what was going on in the congregation. He noticed there was somebody that didn't look Presbyterian in his church. And it's because this young man was wearing a T-shirt and had tattoo flames coming up out of his shirt and on his neck, and tattooed flames on his arm. And so Mark knew immediately he wasn't Presbyterian. And so after the service, he, of course, as pastors do, we go and say hello to folks that we think are new to our church. And so he went over to say hello, and this young man began to share a little bit of his story with Mark. And he says, I know something's missing in my life. I know there's got to be more to life than what I've experienced. He wasn't going to church. And so he knew, because of that feeling of missing something in his life, he decided to seek out God in the church. And so he started visiting churches in California. And he shows up in Mark's church after visiting several churches. And he says to Mark, I noticed something about the churches that I visited. He says, I've been to a lot of churches, and they talk a lot about Jesus, yet they don't talk about how to live for Jesus in the world. And then I go to some other churches, and they talk a lot about the world, and they don't talk much about Jesus. And then he asked Mark this question: if I hang out here with you guys, will I actually meet people that act like Jesus? Wow. Think about that. Would we really find people that act like Jesus? And what he was asking was a great question, which I think the younger generation, the millennial generation is asking, is we want to meet people that are trying to live like Jesus. We want to meet people who are trying to put it into practice in their life. And that's where practical teaching comes in. Because practical teaching is not just about giving us information. Practical teaching is about transformation. Helping people change lives, helping people transform their lives, and to give practical teaching that encourages us to go put into practice what we're being taught. And that's what we're talking about this morning. Now, I think of practical teaching as that which is relevant and applicable to life. So it's not just giving me information that's nice, biblical knowledge is nice, that's information, but I want to know, how do I take what I'm learning and put it into practice in my life? How does this change my life? How does this transform me? And I think we need to think that way. Disciple Bible study we've offered here at our church, and many people have been through Disciple Bible study. One of the things about Disciple Bible study is that in Disciple Bible study, they talk about, we don't want to just give you information. We want to teach you the Bible so that it transforms you. So that you don't just hear the Bible, understand the Bible, but also talk about, how am I going to put the Bible, what I'm learning in the Bible, into practice in my life. So they say it's not about information, it's about transformation. But think about our lives. How much of our life is dedicated to accumulating information? We've actually got IT people here, right? Information technology, right? A lot of our world is about accumulating and accessing information. It's not all about transformation. So I can accumulate lots of information and lots of knowledge and lots of learning and lots of degrees. In fact, I've got a doctoral degree and I've got a library full of books, but I can tell you I haven't applied half of what I've learned. Because application is always the hard part, right? The accumulation stuff is the easy part. You know, I run occasionally, a couple times a week, I run out on the trails in Patapsco Park for exercise. Well, I wouldn't call it running. Maybe it's more like walking or jogging or slow-paced pain and suffering. I don't know. But I go out and I exercise and I run these trails, and occasionally, especially on Saturday mornings when I go out, I come across what I call the newbies, the hikers in Patapsco Park, right? Now, Patapsco Park, where I run, is right off of 40. The longest trail is probably 3 miles long. But I come across these newbies, I would call them, and they've got all this new gear. They've got the new backpack, the new jacket, the new pants, the new hiking boots. I'm still waiting to see somebody with ice pick, in their hands, because they saw it at REI and they had to have it, And they have the water bottles and they've got the compass. And I'm sitting there going, what do you need a compass for? If you get lost out here, you're either going to end up at Walmart or Route 40. You're not. It's okay. It's safe out here. And then I go running by with no equipment. No, just shorts and a t-shirt, running shoes, and I go by them, and they look at me like, boy, that guy's really hardcore, And I'm like, they're amazed, and I'm sitting there, this is nothing, So what they've done is they've accumulated all this stuff, and they've gone out on this mini adventure. And if they had the experience and had actually put into practice the hiking, they would have known that they didn't need all that stuff. That the practice and the experience would have helped them to become wise, to know that they don't need all this stuff here in this particular area. That they're not climbing Mount Everest, we're not doing Denali, we're not doing it, but we're in Patapsco Park. So their experience, their lack of practice was hindering them actually in that situation. But what they had done was they had accumulated lots of stuff. And see, I think we've learned to do that in our consumer society, right? We've learned to accumulate not only stuff, but accumulate knowledge and learning, and yet without practical experience and of applying it, we don't really grow. We don't really build deep, big faith because we haven't practiced it. And that's what Jesus is talking about in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus, we heard this passage read this morning, and this is the last thing that Jesus says in a famous sermon called the Sermon on the Mount. And in that sermon, he preaches, what he's doing is he's actually doing practical teaching. He teaches a lot of practical things. He talks about our attitudes, and he lists out the Beatitudes, how to have an attitude, and have an attitude, a good attitude towards God, and seeing God in the world. So he teaches about the Beatitudes, how to be in this great attitude of God. And then he goes on to talk about fasting and what to do with our money and how to pray, what to do when we're angry, how to love our enemies, what to do to forgive somebody. So all these practical things he's teaching, and he's saying, do these things. So he wasn't just giving information, he was preaching for transformation. And at the end of his sermon, his conclusion to the whole sermon are the words that we heard read this morning. And I want you just to hear a few words out of that. He talks about the wise people are the ones who hear and do, practice. And the foolish ones are the ones who hear and do not do or do not practice. So the difference between being wise and being foolish, between building our house on the sand and building our house on a rock, is the difference between having the knowledge and not doing it, or having the knowledge and doing it. So that's the challenge, right? How are we going to live like Jesus? So Jesus talks about that, and I was thinking about for us, what's the sand that we might build our faith on? Build our house of faith on? What is the sand? What does the sand look like for us? That's sometimes hearing and not doing. And I think sometimes we change out the doing for what I would call religiosity. Now, I think sometimes we build our faith on what I would call the sand of religiosity, being religious rather than being in a relationship with God built on trust and faith. Now, I'll give you a couple examples of that. One is I was driving through Thurmont, Maryland one day, many years ago. I'm driving, the guy's in a pickup truck. Anybody been to Thurmont, Maryland? Right? You know, about Mountain Gate Restaurant, fried chicken, right? Or the Cozy, or Color Fest was last weekend, I think, in Thurmont. So I'm driving through Thurmont, Main Street. It's Sunday afternoon, okay? It's important you know it's Sunday afternoon. Guy's in a pickup truck in front of me, and we're cruising through town, down the middle of town, and we're doing 30, 35, whatever the speed limit is. Of course, we're doing the speed limit. And we're going through town. All of a sudden, he slams on the brakes, and he stops in the middle of the road. So I'm looking around at a dog jump out in front of him. Is somebody trying to cross the street? Nothing. The road ahead is completely empty. And he slammed on his brakes. He stops in the middle of the road. I hit my brakes in the middle of the road. And I'm like, what is this guy doing? And just as I'm about to, do the honk, I see him, I can see through the back window. I see him turn and look to his left. And to the left was the Catholic church in town. And he does this. And then he steps on the gas and speeds off again. Now here's my interpretation. Somebody missed church that day. But he felt obligated, somehow he knew because he missed church that somehow he had to at least check the box, right? So that's what he was doing. He was checking the box. All right, I know I wasn't there, Father, but I did stop and, do this. What was he doing? He was being religious. He was practicing religion. And one of the things Andy Stanley talks about in his sermon is how church attendance, just attending church, just showing up in church is not enough to transform us. We may do that out of obligation or say, okay, God, I went to church this week, and so we can check the box, and then we go live the other 6 days or the other 6.5 days of the week as though we've never been to church, as though we never heard the gospel, as though we never heard something that we could put into practice in our lives this week. So practical teaching should be encouraging us. So do you hear me right now? I'm not saying don't come to church. Although, if something else is going to help you grow, we'll talk about it. But hopefully what we do here in church encourages you to put into practice in your own life what's happening. If that's not happening for you, come talk to me. I want to do that. I want to be a pastor and a preacher who helps you and encourages you to put your faith into practice. And so we're all doing that together. The other thing I would mention that we actually do something religiously every week here in our service. Every week we do something religiously besides attend church. And you know what it is? What do we do I heard it, someone over here, yes. We recite the Lord's Prayer. Do you know where Jesus teaches us the Lord's Prayer? Does anybody want to take a guess?
Right after, as part of the Sermon on the Mount.
It's actually, you're right, it's in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus teaches this prayer, and I won't even call it a prayer, but he teaches in chapter 6 in the sermon. He doesn't teach people to recite the prayer. He teaches people how to pray. And there's a difference between reciting a prayer and praying the prayer, or how to pray. I mean, how many of us have ever recited the prayer and not prayed the prayer? Maybe even this morning. Yeah, I've done it. Last week, I'm sitting up here with the worship leader, and I'm looking at the order of worship. I go, do we pray the Lord's Prayer? And she's like, yeah, we already did that. Obviously, I wasn't there. I had checked out, right? I was somewhere else during that part of the service. I was thinking about the sermon or whatever. So what I'm saying is it's possible for us to be religious, to recite a prayer, and yet not have it be a faith-based, big faith prayer on how to pray. So when Jesus laid out this prayer, he wasn't saying recite this. He was saying here's how to pray. And so he was saying you start out praying this way. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. He was saying the first thing you do when you pray, come to God, recognize who God is, know that God is holy, and come humbly to God. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. What's the next part? Thy will be done. That's a statement, a prayer of faith, isn't it? I am saying to God, God, I want your will to be done in my life, not my will to be done. I am praying for your will your plan, because I want to live that plan for my life. So that's a prayer of faith. That's a prayer of big faith to say, God, I want to live your will and not my will. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Bring heaven down to earth, God. Help us to recognize and see you in the world we live in. As in heaven as is in I lost it already, see? Because I'm so used to reciting it, right? So our Father art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread. We're to pray and say, God, what are the things I need today? Now, you and I don't need bread, but the prayer is the same. What do I need to sustain me today, God? Here are the things I'm encountering today. God, help me, sustain me in this. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Ooh. Can we just skip that part? Right? Because our forgiveness is linked to our ability to forgive. And it's not that God's not willing to forgive us. God is willing to forgive us 100%. But God is saying, I want you to forgive other people the way I forgive you. And so how much time do we spend praying for those people we're having a hard time forgiving? That we bring those names before God and we bring those circumstances before God and God, I need help with this. I'm having a hard time forgiving this person or these people or whatever. And I need to bring that to God and pray about that. Forgive us our trespasses, we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. What are we tempted by? What are we struggling with? Where are we having a hard time doing God's will? Where is there sin in our lives that we need to ask for God to deliver us from? Where is there evil in the world that we need to be a part of delivering others from? And deliver us from evil, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever, which is not really there in the Sermon on the Mount. It's something that we add. It is biblical. We add it to the end of the prayer, and we end the prayer by once again saying, God, you're big. You're big enough to handle all these things I've just prayed about. So it's a pattern and a guide for prayer, not something to be recited, not something to be religious. It's about something that we're actually supposed to practice. So next week, when we recite the prayer, what are we going to do? Pray the prayer, right? Think about the prayer and maybe even use it as a guide in your prayer life this week. Because really, what God is looking for is not religiosity. What God is looking for is trust, faith. And where do we find that? In relationship to God. When you're in a trust relationship, when you're in a relationship with someone that you trust and they trust you, that can be one of the most powerful relationships, most transforming relationships in the world. And when it's with God, it is the most transforming relationship you and I will ever have. And so Jesus says this transformational relationship that builds big faith is built on the rock of practice, built on the rock of obedience, actually. That when we obey God, we're saying, God, I trust you. Now, when I bring up the word obedience, what does it make you think of? Dog, getting in trouble, I'm bad, right? But I hear the first thing that I hear everybody say is a dog. I'm a dog. No, God is not saying that He wants us to be like our dogs. You know, God is not saying go to obedience school. But obedience to God's plan and God's will is a matter of faith and trust, is it not? Saying, God, I'm going to trust you and I'm going to obey you because I trust that you have my back or you are at work in my life. Sorry to bring this up this morning, but I know the Orioles had a rough week and we were really hoping they'd go to the World Series, right? And Kansas City just, it was a fluke thing. That's what I say, right? So they didn't make a World Series, but it reminded me of a story about Earl Weaver. Does anybody remember Earl Weaver? They've celebrated his life down at Camden Yards because of his, he's a legacy there. And Earl Weaver was managing the team when Reggie Jackson, I know I hate to use that name, he is a Yankee. Reggie Jackson played for the Baltimore Orioles. Did you all know that? Some of you may remember, some of you may not. Some of you are like, I don't care about baseball, but just stay with me. So Reggie Jackson, it's his first year, the 1 year he played for the Orioles, And Earl Weaver had rules, and the players were supposed to obey those rules. Like, for example, one rule was you always wore a tie on the bus, and when we travel together as a team, you always wear a tie. And Reggie Jackson showed up to the bus one day in all these nice, trendy clothes, no tie, but he wore his tie. He tied the tie around his wrist so that when Earl Weaver says, you're supposed to be wearing a tie, he lifted up his wrist. And he said, see, I'm wearing a tie. And Earl Weaver was like, put it around your neck so I can just yank it, you know. So he would, Reggie Jackson was known to be rebellious towards Earl. And one of the other rules that Earl Weaver had about playing on a team is that you never stole a base without the sign. So that, if you ever watch baseball, they give the signs and they tell the runners what to do and what the batters what to do. And so Reggie's on first base. He got on first base, and he's looking at second base, and he's confident he can steal second base. But Earl Weaver doesn't give him the sign to steal second, and he knows this is a team rule. Nobody does this. But he knows he can. He's looking at the catcher. He's looking at the pitcher. He's figuring out when he's going to time it just right. He knows he can do this. He's fast enough. And so, sure enough, he picks the right time, and he steals, and he makes it to second base, and he steals second base safe. He gets up on the bag, dusts himself off, looks at Earl Weaver like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Game went on. Game's over. I don't remember whether they won or lost. But Earl Weaver pulls Reggie Jackson aside after the game and says, Reggie, I need you to listen to me. I need you to obey me. Because I know you can steal second base, and you know you can steal second base. That's not the point. He said, I'm thinking about not only you, but I'm thinking about the next batter and the batter after that. He says the next batter would have been Lee May. Lee May was their home run hitter, their power hitter, and he would have got up, and if he had had a chance to hit, maybe he would have hit a home run and hit both of you in because he was our best hitter. But because you stole second base, the pitcher intentionally walked Lee May to first base because they could do that now because you weren't on first base. He says, then the next batter after Lee May was one of our weakest batters on the team, and now because I've got two men on base, I've got to pull that weak batter and bring in my pinch hitter, because the pinch hitter I was saving for later in the game to help us win the game, now I've got to use early in the game because you stole second base. And then Reggie got it. See, Reggie was only looking at how he could get from first to second base, and Earl Weaver was looking at the whole game. Earl was looking at the game plan. And who in our lives has the game plan? We do. Not we do. God does, right? We think we have the game plan. Maybe that's a real honest statement right there. That's a Freudian slip. We think we've got the game plan. God's got the game plan, and that's where obedience comes in. We know we can get from here to there, but does God want us to go from here to there? What does God want us to do? How does God want us to practice? How does God want us to behave? So I want to challenge you this week to apply this message. And this is a little bit tough. So you ready? You don't know whether to say you're ready or not because I haven't told you what it is. You're not sure yet. That's okay. So here's what I ask you to do. Where are you struggling to obey God? You know there's something that you're to be doing or not doing, and you're struggling to be obedient because you don't think you should be obedient. You're not a dog, right? We don't think of ourselves that way. That's not the way God looks at it. But where are you struggling with obedience, obeying God, and doing God's will in your life? And what I want you to do is if you can identify that one thing, here's the challenging part. I want you to go share it with somebody. A trusted friend, a Christian friend. Maybe many of you are in small groups. In your small groups, if you feel that's a safe place for you, share that with your small group and say, here's what I'm struggling with. Or share that with a friend, a good Christian friend that you trust, and say, here's what I'm struggling with. And then ask your friend to do this. Hold you accountable. Hold you accountable to doing what you want to do or not do. Say, I want you to check in with me and check and see if I've done this or not done this. I just want you to help hold me accountable, because that's where the faith community helps us grow in our faith. It's in this community of faith and in community with other people and other Christians that we are held accountable to the things that God wants us to do. And that's the beauty of the church. That's the beauty of the faith community. When that works well, it's great. And so we need those people, because I know that following God and doing God's will and obeying God is not a solo endeavor. Can't do it on your own. It's hard on your own. So I want to encourage you to do that this week. Think about that. Share that with somebody. Because here's the reason that Jesus said to do that, to do these things, to practice. He said, because the storms are going to come. None of us here in this room are going to be spared the storm. We're all going to face storms in our life. Every single one of us is going to be hit by a storm. The question is, will our faith be big enough, strong enough, built on the rock to withstand the storm? Or will it fall apart when the storm comes? My prayer, my hope for us is that we will have strong faith. We will have faith that is built on the rock that will withstand that storm. Amen?